Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reski.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
This is another episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. On tonight's episode, we are going to do what we like to call the AfterTalk. Recently, my co-host Jim Reski taught on the last part of the book of Deuteronomy. And Jim, just so you know, from my perspective, I thought you did an amazing job. It was great.
Thanks, Greg.
It was great.
So kind of you. Thanks.
But one of the things we say is, or at least I think I told you this, that when you give a presentation, there's always the talk you prepare, the talk you deliver, and then the talk you wish you would have delivered.
That's right.
And so sometimes the afternoon, right after we have both of us have taught our various things, you know, we just keep thinking about, I should have said this, or I forgot to say this, or we just think of ways to improve. But I'm thinking this is going to be a hard one to have much to say here. But
oh no,
oh no,
I've got like a dozen things.
You know,
it's funny. It's like you've taught me that phrase a long time ago, which I just so good. That thing about the three talks. You always give three talks. And I've always thought of it like when you if you give a talk and you kind of stumble or stammer your way through it, you're like, oh shoot, you kind of, you say things, we've all given talks like this, like that went badly. I didn't have it down. But I think there are times when you say, no, I kind of got through the talk okay, and the time management was okay, and the talk was coherent and it came out okay. Which I felt like this talk of Deuteronomy. So for our listeners on the podcast, listen to the previous podcast, it would have been the Deuteronomy podcast as delivered, the Deuteronomy Bible study as delivered in front of a live group of guys in the Bible study. I thought it was coherent. I delivered it okay, but there's still about a dozen things that I thought, I left that out. And that, wish I had said that. So I'm so glad we have this after talk to cover, even a talk that is, you could deliver okay.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing when we're dealing with such large chunks of scripture.
Oh yeah.
The preparation, we over prepare.
Yeah.
And you have so much material, you have to cut it out in order to make the time frame. And then if you have people asking questions or sharing their comments or thoughts as you're delivering it, then that adds another factor. Okay, so where do you want to start, Jim?
Well, maybe we should start with the two letters, because that was kind of the heart of the thing. We didn't really go to do that at the pre-talk. So maybe it's good to just give a little context, because if people are listening to the podcast in sequence, they would have heard the pre-talk, and then in the talk I said, hey, there's this idea of writing two different letters. And I think I referenced it during the talk, but the people listening to the podcast should know that in sequence, the previous Bible study leader who spoke about this was saying, you should write a letter to your congressperson, and you should write them a letter about Christian standards on, and I think he said things like they were more like, our view on moral issues of the day, like the sexual purity issues,
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I was picking up on that, and that's why and probably listeners to my talk might have inferred that or gotten that idea that was in the previous talk, and I was responding to that by saying, that's fine, write that letter, I agree, but here's a second letter you really ought to write as well, so hopefully that was clear enough that people kind of got that gist, that I was referencing a previous speaker that they would not have heard on the podcast, but people in the room had heard the previous week. But part of that thinking, it was, was driven by some of what Keller had to say about the political parties. And I did leave that part out, and probably good to do that, because I don't want, we both say, I agree, don't want that a Bible study to be a political event. Really don't want the names of living politicians or political parties. It's just too easy to drift down that road. And And I don't want to go to church like that either. I want a church to be apolitical. I don't want to come to church and have them say, see, it's, talk about the news and tell
Hmm.
me who to vote for. And that's not why I'm there. And I want a group of a Bible study where people who are from dramatically different political persuasions can come together because they're both believers, they're both redeemed, and they can share different perspectives, hopefully calmly and civil in a civil way, but not let that be part of the Bible study itself and part of the or a church and worship service or anything. I like it to be apolitical.
Right.
Um, but
I
in the
agree.
letter writing thing, there was something that Keller wrote a while back saying, that, and this is kind of in the back of my mind thinking about that no one political party ever does this. No one political party ever has a strong emphasis on, sexual moral ethics, right? Like including things like abortion rights and the sexes between a man and a woman in a marriage relationship. That's considered traditional conservative values, but
Hmm.
also this incredible care for the poor and the powerless, and one of those tends to be conservative, the other one tends to be liberal. And his point was almost no political party marries it. And that's what I was thinking about when I said, wouldn't that have been an incredible witness to the nations if Israel pulled that off? If they had been the one that did marry it together.
Hmm.
Because no one does that. But when I was saying that and going through that, there was a passage in Proverbs 31 that I was going to read. I had my notes on the side. It's probably good that I didn't because that would have gone over time if I had. But it's a great passage, and maybe we should read it now. It's from Proverbs 31 because it really spoke to the idea of the letter number two, the letter that where you have a concern for the poor and powerless, and try to marry letter one and letter two together. So I don't know if you have that.
Yeah, I have it. Which verses?
Just reach verse 1 through 9. Verse 1 through 9.
Okay. Okay. The words of King Lemuel, the oracle which his mother taught him. What, O my son, and what, O son of my womb, and what, O son of my vows?
Okay, stop there a second. I just want to
Yeah.
tell you, I love this passage because this just sounds like a mother talking to her son, right? And I would say I was going to have some fun with it if I had to use it during the study, to say, because it's in my mind, it reads like this: What, my son, and what, O son of my womb, and what, O son of my vows? Like, come
That's,
on now, talk to me now. It's that kind of, with just three sentences starting with the word "what." Sounds like
yeah,
a mother talking to her child. What, my son, and what, O son of my womb, and what, O son of my vows. I don't know any other verses like that in the Bible. I've always loved that. So please
that's
continue.
good. Oh man, you just added a lot to it there. Um,
It's fun.
do not give your strength to women or your ways to that which destroys kings. It is not for kings, O Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, or for rulers to desire strong drink. For they will drink and forget what is decreed, and pervert the rights of the afflicted. Give strong drink to him who is perishing, and wine to him whose life is bitter. Let let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his trouble no more.
Now
Open
stop there
your
a sec. Stop there
Okay.
a sec. Because this section here, this is a mother of the king giving him advice, right? And saying, you need to be on your guard against personal fleshly indulgence. And he starts right away with sexual purity. Do not give your strength to women or your ways to that which destroys kings. Do I need to say it out loud, son? She's
Mm,
like, she's clearly saying, don't, you're the kingly position. You could do what a lot of people in power do, which is use that power to just indulge your flesh and indulge your pleasures, but don't do that. And then a whole section on alcohol, right? So, sexual proclivities and substance abuse. It says, don't do that. Keep your nose clean living. And those are great conservative principles. We'd say, see, isn't that great advice? That was letter number one.
right.
Right. Yeah. It's like, what? You got to stand up for this and don't just because you're king, don't go down that road and you got to live in the straight and narrow and, keep your nose clean. So that's great. And now read, continue. Verse 9.
Verse 9.
Oh,
Open
verse
your mouth.
8, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
yeah. Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all the unfortunate. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and defend the rights of the afflicted and the needy.
The poor and the powerless.
Yeah.
The poor and the powerless. See, keep your nose clean. Letter number one. This sexual purity stuff is really important, and substance abuse. Don't do this. Don't use all your power to just indulge yourself, right? But you do need to use your power for defend the rights of the afflicted and needy.
Yeah.
Right. Open your mouth for the mute. The people, you need to care about people that have no power, no ability to care for themselves, that can't do it. Right. So
Oh,
it's a great passage. I mean, I love that little what thing at the beginning, but
yeah.
this thing just ties together like what I was trying to do in the talk, letter 1 and 2, and puts it all together. So
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah. That's
yeah,
Proverbs 31 verses 1 to 9, if anybody wants to go back and look at that.
that's right. And then and so what I was trying to get across is this notion that you need to care about and have on your heart what's on God's heart. And I did that in the letter, body of the letter itself, right? When I was saying, I as a Christian, I care about what God cares about. And so the point is, and then later in the talk saying, well, what can we learn from Deuteronomy? We're supposed to keep all these laws. Well, what you can learn is like what's on God's heart. And
Right.
God does care about both things. He cares about, sexual purity and that moral law. But he also cares about caring for the rights of the poor and powerless, which again, no political party does. And then there was another story that I was going to lead right into that I didn't have time for. And again, it's probably good I didn't because it involves a political figure. She was not a someone who ran for office, but she's credited for starting the whole Social Security program. So that is, if you're getting a Social Security check, you have her to thank for it.
Wow.
And yeah, because she
Did you hear was she speaking somewhere or
no, she was a labor secretary under FDR,
okay.
and she was her name was Frances Perkins. And so we won't go into great detail on it now, but it's an incredible life story. And it ties into something that was very much part of my New York experience.
Yeah. Talk
And
about it.
well, so I'll tell it briefly, and people can look it up on Wikipedia and see her life. Frances, Frances, Frances Perkins. But she was labor secretary in FDR, kind of reluctantly. He kept saying, I need you in Washington with me. Because she had, he was governor of New York, and she had been his like secretary of, I don't know, some title like the secretary of labor, but a similar role, or secretary of industry or something like that, similar role in his administration. He was governor of New York. And she became what was known as his moral conscience. Like she was the little angel on his shoulder with the moral consciousness of FDR during the World War II. In his cabinet, she was the moral conscience. And she did things like she set up a Social Security system. So if you're getting a Social Security check or you're paying a Social Security looking forward to that check, you have her to thank. But her story really started with an event that happened in New York City that almost every New Yorker I know knows about, but not everybody outside of New York knows about it. And it's the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. And that fire happened, I don't know the year. I can look it up. I should know the year. 19 would have been like around in the 20s, 1920s. But what happened was there was a building in New York City, because a lot now New York City is filled with skyscrapers and neighborhoods. But this was a like a 10, 12-story building that was a factory, and they were filled with women who were working on sewing clothes, and a fire broke out. And the owners of the factory had they had gotten a break from the commission when they built the building to have 2 fire escapes instead of 3. They had a third, instead of having 2 indoor fire escapes, they had one that was out on the outside.
Okay. This
And
happened in 1911.
oh, thank you.
Saturday, March 25th, 1911.
Yeah, there are some. I don't think a lot of people know about it, but like I said, there's some History Channel specials on it, and there's a lot you could read about it on Wikipedia and get the details. To make a long story short, it was awful. It was horrific, and it was like on the 9th, 10th, and 11th floor of this building. The owners had also locked the doors to the existing fire escapes because they wanted to search the belongings of the purses of the women as they were leaving works, because they were afraid they're going to steal something, and they also wanted to keep union organizers out. And so when the fire broke out, there's like clothing and stuff everywhere, so it just spread like wildfire. and the women were all just trapped. And so eventually 146 women died, all between the ages of 18 and 24. And many of them jumped to their death, started jumping out of the building. And Frances Perkins was a socialite at the time, a wealthy New Yorker, was having tea with some other ladies, like not far from there, heard all the commotion, and went over to see what was happening and saw these women jumping to their death, hitting the sidewalk, and changed her life forever. And what she came out of that saying, and she's like, I'm, wealthy socialite. I can just spend my life having tea with my friends. She came out and said, I have an obligation to care for others. Wow. And that's why she got involved. And then she became an advocate for all these things. By the way, the story, the owners of that factory went to trial and they were exonerated. They said, no, you didn't break any laws. It's fine. And it created an outrage. And this is why it really shapes that's, like I said, a lot of New Yorkers know that story. And it shapes an idea of saying, capitalism is great, but it needs to be regulated. You can't have capitalism run amok and just abuse people like that. You have to have regulated capitalism. So that's kind of there's a whole part of that story that goes that way. Really not an avenue I would want to go down in our Bible study. It's more what happened to Frances Perkins, because she happened to be having tea nearby and came by, and her whole life was changed, and the trajectory of the United States was changed as a result, because Frances Perkins got involved and said, I need to care about other people. That's letter number two. Right? And so get on your heart what's on God's heart, because God says, look, these poor, the powerless. King Lemuel, listen, you need to care for the afflicted and needy.
Yeah.
So in our study, there was one guy who raised his hand. I think this is I don't think this was edited out. I think it'll be on the podcast if people listen to it. Who said maybe that letter needs to be to the churches. And we didn't dwell on that in the study. And I said, you're getting ahead of me. I'll get to that in a second. So I don't know if I ever came back to it. But I talked to him after the study. I thought that was an interesting comment, because some churches, you might think, and let's not name denominations, but maybe sort of mainline denominations that you might think are more liberal denominations. They say, what we need here is the social gospel. You don't need to go and proselytize and convert souls. You need to go feed people. You need to go, build homes and do that kind of thing. And who cares what people who people sleep with? It's none of your business. It doesn't matter. That kind of stuff is, old school. We don't care about that stuff and saving souls. We just want to help people physically meet their physical needs. It's a social gospel. And there are other more, we might call more conservative denominations, and we say that's ridiculous. We're here to save souls for Christ. So we're going to do evangelism. We're going to go to these countries and share the gospel, but really don't go in there and try to rebuild homes and feed people and do that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And not many do that well. Actually, when Keller talked about this, he said, it's just his view, he said one of the few organizations that does that really well is the Catholic Church, because they kind of hold firmly to sexual purity and abortion rights on the one hand, but also Catholic relief ministries. There's a lot of work around the world to help feed the poor and care about those things and do those things. So it's interesting, Keller mentioned that. And I think they tried to model Redeemer in New York off that, to both, share the gospel, but also, through different ministries. At the time, they called it Hope for New York. I don't know what they call it now, but really try to do some things, help the city as well. And you might have heard that. Remember that idea that what you want is your neighbors, even if they say, I don't know what they care, what they believe in that church. But if that church folded, we'd have to raise taxes in this town because they do so many good things, right?
Right. Oh, yeah.
Right. And that's letter one and letter two. That's the blending. If you could be that kind of, again, no political party does that. Most denominations don't do that. But if you could be a church that married both, just like God wanted for the nation of Israel, what a witness that would be. So anyway, those are some of the so things in the letter one and letter two I wanted. There are a couple more thoughts I'll get to in a second, but those are some of the more important things I want to get out. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.